Thank you very much for joining me for our new edition of NeuRA Talks, which will be launching in November this year, 2023. And today we're going to be debating the $64 million question that everybody wants to know the answer to: is dementia preventable? So I'm going to go to each of you in turn, starting with Professor Kaarin Anstey, Dr. Nikki-Anne Wilson, and bringing up the rear, but last but not least, Dr. Bill Brooks. Okay, Kaarin, you're a world expert on dementia prevention and risk reduction. You're part of many, very important bodies, like chair of the International Research Network on Dementia Prevention. You've been part of putting together the WHO guidelines. So you're the right person for this question. Is dementia truly preventable?
Thanks, Carole. This is one of those questions where we have to look at the words that we're using. So we talk about prevention at the population level. So if it's like smoking, when we reduce smoking, we reduce the population level of lung cancer. With dementia, if we reduce all the risk factors for dementia, we will see a reduction in incident cases. So at the population level, we can say we have prevented cases. But for an individual, we can't say for sure if you do all of these health behaviours and you manage all your risk factors, you won't develop dementia, because there's many other genetic factors and we just don't know yet enough about the individual to be able to say we can prevent it. Having said that, the results of the trials of the new drugs which are being presented at conferences at the moment are really incredible. So there may be a future where dementia is much more preventable through drugs as well, but we're not there yet.
I think, though, you can lower your risk significantly, can't you?
Absolutely. Yeah. You can lower your risk and you can change, slow that cognitive decline in ageing quite significantly through modifying risk factors. So things like looking at your heart health, keeping your blood pressure managed, managing diabetes, so all of the vascular risk factors, and then engaging in a healthy lifestyle, so physical activity, adhering to a healthy diet, usually a MIND dietary pattern with emphasising some of the neuroprotective foods like berries and leafy green vegetables. There's an awful lot you can do, and all of the research shows that people that follow a healthier lifestyle have much lower cognitive decline and delay the incidence of dementia.
I've actually got a question here from one of our supporters, James from Sydney. So out of all the things you can do to lower your risk, which is the key one?
That's a fantastic question. Thank you for that. Look, if I had to pick one, I would pick physical activity, because physical activity also acts on a lot of the other risks. So it also lowers your blood pressure, it helps your glycemic control. It is a treatment for depression. It has so many other benefits, but I think that and keeping your blood pressure managed if you're on medication would be the sort of the top two.
Okay, and another one from Julia in Melbourne, who's asking about the link between hearing loss and dementia.
Look, that's something that's really emerged in the last few years. So what we've been seeing in a lot of the long-term observational studies is that people who have hearing loss, particularly in middle age, have an increased risk of dementia in late life. It's now been shown a number of times, and it actually was included in the recent Lancet Commission report on dementia. So we know that it increases the risk of dementia. We don't understand the mechanism yet, and we're unsure of how to intervene. So obviously wearing hearing aids, if they're prescribed, is thought to be beneficial, but we don't have solid evidence yet.
Okay, and my last one from Karen, who's a long-term supporter of NeuRA. She says, I'm 65 this year, and I'm wondering, is it too late for me to lower my risk?
Absolutely not. It's what we say is it's never too early and it's never too late. So you can make a significant difference at any age. And I'd really like an example with smoking, actually. There was a study conducted in Western Australia of people in their 70s, and they had a group who gave up smoking and a group who kept smoking. And they saw benefits of smoking cessation on the brain. It's a neuroimaging study. They actually saw benefits for people in their 70s who gave up smoking. There was less brain atrophy in that group. So there's a lot of evidence now that for people with cognitive decline and dementia, adhering to a healthy lifestyle also has benefits, and managing all of the risk factors and can slow progression.
Thank you, I like that. Never too early, never too late.
Yeah.
Got it. All right, Nikki-Anne, moving over to you. As well as being a researcher in cognitive health, you're a passionate science communicator, I know, and speaker in the community. What are some common myths or misconceptions that you've come across about dementia prevention?
I think one of the key issues I find, Carole, is that people are still confused about what dementia is in the community. So dementia is actually an umbrella term. It's a bit like cancer. So you can have breast cancer or lung cancer and all these different kinds of cancer, and they'll affect people in different ways. And the same is really true for dementia. So many people will be familiar with the memory changes associated with dementia, but there are also changes in behaviour and language ability that we can see in people with dementia. And I think it's really important to understand these differences and this diversity in dementia so that we can help support people better living with dementia.
And perhaps we should clarify also where Alzheimer's fits within dementia. That'll be a question you get asked a lot, right?
Yes, so many people think that Alzheimer's and dementia are the same thing, and Alzheimer's is one type of dementia. So when we talk about the memory changes in dementia, that's often Alzheimer's disease that's associated with the memory changes. But then there are other kinds of dementia, such as frontotemporal dementia, which present in changes in language and behaviour. So I think it's really important to get this idea out there that dementia is more than just memory changes.
Agreed. Question here from somebody that has made a wonderful gift to us in their will, Carolyn. She says, I recently learnt that you're going to be conducting a study on the benefits of humour in ageing, which sounds terrific, and specifically looking at the link with dementia. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so as part of my research, I'm really keen to explore how we can use a strengths-based approach to dementia prevention. So Kaarin's really explained some of the key lifestyle factors that we know are associated with reducing our dementia risk now. But my research is more approaching it from a social and psychological perspective. So we know that social engagement, keeping socially active and connecting with your community can be really helpful in preventing dementia. But there's also other aspects of our psychological health and our well-being, such as humour, that I'm really interested in exploring as a new way to help prevent dementia and reduce the risk. So humour, when you think about it, is something that we all experience every day, and we've all experienced the joy of a good laugh. And we know that there's biological effects of humour through lowering blood pressure. And there's also aspects of humour that help bind us socially and connect with other people. So hopefully we can explore some of these creative and humorous approaches to dementia risk reduction.
That could be a new slogan, laugh off dementia. Okay, another question from Diane, one of our supporters in Sydney. Sad one. She says, my loved one was recently diagnosed with dementia, and something I've already come across is stigma and fear amongst those close to us. How can we educate others about this?
First of all, I'm really sorry to hear that someone's had their friend or loved one diagnosed with dementia. It's a really hard time for everyone involved. It's really challenging. Stigma is a big issue in people living with dementia. It's still a highly stigmatised condition. People living with dementia experience stigma, and the carers associated with dementia experience stigma. So it's something that I think that, first of all, we have to talk about it. So things like this, where we start talking about dementia and reducing that fear of dementia and having those conversations, that's really important. But also I'd encourage people caring for a loved one with dementia to reach out for help themselves. There are a lot of great organisations that do support people caring for loved ones with dementia. Dementia Australia has some amazing resources, and sometimes it can just help to have a chat with people who are understanding what you're going through. And that's really important to try and maintain your own health and well-being while caring for someone that you love.
And probably also, as you say, just sharing that story is part of educating others, right?
Yes, definitely. And that can help in so many ways. So it helps reduce the stigma about dementia more generally, and it helps your own emotional and psychological well-being to just have someone to confide in that you trust.
Okay, one more for you. This is from Anonymous. I'm a carer for someone with dementia. Do you have advice? There you go. You have already touched on this, but do you have advice on how to take care of my own well-being while being a carer, and what support systems exist?
Definitely reach out to the services available. There are some amazing support services through Dementia Australia. Carers Gateway offers some great resources for respite care. But it's a particularly challenging time, and I think that talking about it and having that family connections and sharing the load around, that can really help support you through those challenging times. But definitely reach out for help if you can.
And of course, it's a challenging time that can go on for a very long time, right? Yeah. I mean, how long can somebody live with dementia?
Many years. I mean, it can be fast progressing, or it can be 20 years, or even longer.
And one of the key issues that we still have is that we can't predict who will live for a longer period and who will die more quickly. So it's a huge challenge trying to make plans for when you're diagnosed, to try and make those plans as to what's going to happen in the future, and there's a lot of uncertainty around that.
Okay. Bill, thank you. On to you. Now, this is interesting. You've been studying families, as I know very well, with the inherited form of Alzheimer's disease for over 3 decades. And since 2009, this work has been carried out as part of the dominantly inherited Alzheimer's network study. So can you start maybe by explaining Alzheimer's to us in simple terms? What's happening in the brain?
Well, Alzheimer's is a description of an actual biological change that's happening in the brain tissue that you can see under the microscope. And it looks different under the microscope, for instance, to frontotemporal dementia, which is a different microscopic picture. And we know that there are 2 abnormal peptides that gradually accumulate in the brain over a couple of decades. And there's quite a lot of that happens before people get any symptoms, and they creep up on you, so that it's often quite hard to tell when there is something wrong. The classical, typical person with Alzheimer's disease starts with forgetfulness and repeating themselves, but it can be different. But then there are, of course, other problems like difficulty finding your way around, difficulty carrying out your usual activities, and problems with language, word finding difficulty, and so on. So that's where it forms part of the umbrella concept of dementia.
A question from one of our supporters, Lizzie. Another person that's in the thick of it. My grandfather has Alzheimer's, and so I've always worried that it's inevitable for me. What role does genetics play in Alzheimer's, and how concerned should I be about that?
I think with your grandfather, provided your parents are okay, I wouldn't be worrying, I wouldn't be losing any sleep about it, put it that way. Okay. There's a small minority of families where there is a purely genetic cause, and in those families it's a single gene that causes the disease, but they're quite rare, and only it's a toss of the coin whether they get the disease form of the gene or not. And those are the people that we work with in the NeuRA study. But in the general community, if you have a first-degree relative, typically a parent who has had dementia or Alzheimer's disease, that gives you a bit of a gold star in terms, it's a risk factor. But it's not, people say genes are not necessarily destiny. You may or may not, you have an increased risk compared with somebody on the street who is the same age but doesn't have a family history of dementia. Around about 1/3 of people with dementia have a family history. So that's quite common. And also, the older you get, the more common dementia is in the community. So you've got 2 relatively common risk factors, but it's not deterministic.
It's not that straightforward.
So the bottom line is, don't worry while that your grandfather's got dementia, and even if your parents have got dementia, you've still got plenty of wriggle room.
I like the sound of that. All right, and Kylie, based in Brisbane, would like to know, what are the latest advancements in treatments for Alzheimer's disease? Kaarin touched on that earlier.
Yes.
And how might these impact those living with the disease?
Well, there's been quite an explosion of good news in the last 2 or 3 years about drugs aimed at removing amyloid from the brain. There are now 4 drugs that have been shown to remove the amyloid protein from the brain, which is one of the 2 main proteins that I was talking about before. It took quite a while for evidence to accrue that actually removing the amyloid had an effect on memory and thinking. But there are 2 drugs for which that is now reasonably well established. Unfortunately, it's not making people better. It's slowing the rate of decline so far, but it's what you might call a proof of concept. For people in the early stages of dementia, it probably gives an extra 3 months of good function to people who might otherwise have deteriorated, and that could be enough to experience a graduation of a grandchild, or the birth of a grandchild, or a significant family event. So those are useful benefits, but they're not yet a cure. I suspect that these drugs will perhaps be most useful at a very early stage, in fact even at a pre-symptomatic stage, but that then raises the question of finding out who is going to develop dementia. Now, there are scans at the moment, and there are spinal fluid tests that can demonstrate whether a person is accumulating amyloid, but they're very expensive and they're difficult. You couldn't have one on every street corner or in every suburb, the way you could have a chest x-ray, for example. So we are hoping that in the next couple of years, maybe blood tests might be able to be developed that might help us work out who might benefit from these drugs. And then, of course, I think the price of the drugs would need to come down for them to be available on a population level.
So we've got ways currently to buy us more time, but as you say, we haven't yet got a cure.
We haven't yet got a cure, and I think what we hope is that that other drugs and mechanisms might be enlisted, as well as so far the developments have mainly been in amyloid research, but there's also the tau protein, which is as yet a largely uncharted field, but it may be that as with, say, blood pressure or cancer, we might need to approach it in several different ways.
A multifaceted approach. Actually, you've led very nicely into the last question for you, which actually is a question I might share with Kaarin and Nikki-Anne as well. But for you first, Bill, Olga, based in Perth, asks, what is the aspect of Alzheimer's research that gives you the most hope for the future?
Well, for the people that I work with, I've seen over the last 7 or 8 years that the families for whom this is a very real problem for most of their lives, because they grow up knowing that it's in the family, these new drugs have given them hope, and we see a new spirit of hope. For the general population, I think there is tremendous hope in these studies of lifestyle modifications, and we are seeing the evidence that that's happening on a population basis, and things like control of blood pressure, diet, exercise, social interaction, and all those things are really, we now have actually experimental evidence that they are worth doing.
Kaarin, I'm sure you would agree with that.
Absolutely. I think both developments, both the drug developments for Alzheimer's and the lifestyle population approaches, are both great sources of hope.
Because I think, and Nikki-Anne touched on this, there's a lot of fear around dementia, isn't there? So I guess that's where medical research comes in, because we create hope. That's what we do. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing is that there's much more awareness about living well with dementia, destigmatising dementia, a world where someone with dementia participates fully and they're not excluded from things. I think that, you know, having a dementia-friendly society is also a sort of, you know, a reason to have hope.
And Nikki-Anne, just to close with you, your greatest hope in terms of dementia research, is it the humour?
Yeah, I think we're shifting from seeing dementia as a disease to a part of a person. So dementia, living well with dementia, is becoming more of the narrative these days. Like, there are people living in the community living well with dementia. And I think that if we consider the whole person and how we can support the whole person and ensuring that our well-being is maintained across our life, that's going to leave us in the best place to help reduce our dementia risk.
Thank you all very much. I hope we've done a good job of answering that $64 million question. Is dementia preventable?
Watch this space.
Watch this space.